We're going to build the Trello action that we saw in the first lesson. This action shows a dialog with the cards that we have in our to-do list. If we select a card and click OK, it moves the card to the next column. Let's begin by creating a new package called Trello inside the Actions package. We now create a new class called Trello Action, and as we saw in the previous lesson, this class will have to implement an action and override the method actionPerform. Now, here is where we have to create the dialog that the user will see. However, the IntelliJ framework doesn't have out-of-the-box support to test UI code, so now it's a good time to think about the architecture of our plugin so we can easily test it afterwards. The idea is to extract any logic into classes that don't depend on the UI components. In this case, I'm going to follow the Model View Presenter pattern, or MVP, which has been followed by the Android community for a long time and is well understood. In this pattern, the view delegates the user events to the presenter, which then uses the model to retrieve data, format it, etc., and updates the view with it. Let's leave the action aside for a moment and start creating the different classes to architect our Trello action. We first need a new data class that we will call card. This data class models the card structure from the Trello API. We will keep it simple and only use the ID, name, and description. Let's move on to the view interface. This interface will have three methods so the presenter can interact with the view. The first one will be used to display the cards in the view, so it will receive a list of cards as a parameter. We need another one to show a success message, and a final one that will display an error message if something goes wrong. We will implement this interface and create the dialog in the next lesson. We're also going to need a repository to fetch and update the cards remotely. We begin by creating an interface called Trello Repository with two methods, one to fetch the cards and one to move a specific card to the next column. We can now create an implementation of the interface that won't really be doing anything just yet. Moving now on to the presenter interface. This is what the view will use to interact with the presenter, and it will have two methods. The first one, it will load the cards using the repository that we created before. And the second one, it will use the repository again to move a specific card to the next column. We can now implement the interface, and we will have to pass the view and the repository to the constructor. The last step in our architecture is to add some dependency injection. You can use whichever library you want to, like Dagger, Coin, or any others, but I'm going to keep it extremely simple and do manual injection instead. I'm going to have a simple interface that will provide a repository and our presenter. The presenter needs a view which will be passed externally. We can now implement the Trello Injector interface. For the Trello repository, we will use bylazy and return the repository implementation that we created. For the Trello presenter, we can reuse the repository instance that we have just created and the view that's passed as a parameter. And that's everything. These are the classes that we will use in future lessons to finish our Trello action. But before we finish, let's do a quick recap. We are using an MVP pattern to architect our action. This action will create a dialog that will implement Trello Action View and act as our view. The view will send user events to a presenter, which will fetch data from a repository, and then it will update the view with that data. To inject our different classes, we will use our own injector rather than using Dagger or Coin, and we will pass that injector from the action to the view.